Hi guys, it's Danny. Okay, so my viewer Troy has asked me a question related to sunburned leaves on orchids. So today we will discuss about what is sunburn, what causes it, and how we can avoid it. Now, as the name suggests, a sunburn is a wound of some sorts caused by the rays of the sun. And as you expect, it is a burnt patch on an orchid leaf. I have an example here on my Vanda orchid. This is how a sunburn looks like. If you can see this patch of yellow and dead tissue on the leaf, but a sunburn can also be brown. It just depends on the orchid and the amount of damage. On my orchid here, I can see the sunburn was pretty fast and pretty severe. Now, orchids in general are pretty prone to sunburns because they cannot tolerate direct, full, hot sun on their leaves. What happens is that the rays of the sun heat up the surface of the leaf so much that the cells inside actually collapse and die off. So this is why you see that patch of dead tissue, of dried tissue. Once a sunburn happens, there's no way to actually revert the process since the cells are already dead. So in the end, it can result into a very unsightly looking orchid. Or worse, if you don't take measures, it can burn up the whole orchid and actually kill it, or at least set it back quite a while. So it is in your best interest to keep an eye on your orchid and actually to avoid direct hot noon sun and avoid those ugly, unsightly patches of dried tissue on your orchid. Now, some orchids are more prone to sunburns than others. Orchids like Phalaenopsis or Paphiopedilums, which don't really require bright light, can get sunburns more easy than a Vanda orchid or a Cattleya orchid. But it certainly does not mean that Vanda orchids or Cattleyas cannot get sunburned. I just showed you a Vanda orchid with a sunburn. So for those orchids who require bright light and some direct sunshine, the best thing to do is to give direct sunshine only in the morning hours. At this hour, the sun is really not that strong and the temperature in your environment is not hot yet. So for an hour in the morning or 2 hours, I think you are pretty safe to provide direct sunshine to the orchids that actually require it. But you should still avoid the noon sun because it is more powerful than the morning sun. If your growing space has an orientation that always receives full sun, there are a few things you can do to alter the sunlight. Now, what I use is actually a sheer curtain. This curtain does let light come in, but does not let direct full sun hit the orchid's leaves. It's more of a dappled light actually, so you can definitely use sheer curtains or any other curtain that still lets light come in, but not the direct beam of the sun. Another thing you can do is actually to glue or to stick on your windows that translucent foil. It might be quite unsightly if you try to place it in your home, but if you have a separate room or a growing space where you grow your orchids, you can place that translucent material on the windows and your orchids will be more than safe. If you're growing your orchids outside, the best thing you can do is place them in a semi-shaded location, maybe on your porch or underneath a tree where they will receive dappled light. There's another benefit to this. The wind actually cools down the orchid leaves. So if you're growing your orchids outside, you are pretty safe from sunburn if you keep them in a shaded location and let the wind cool out the leaves. If you're growing them in a growing space, using a fan can actually help with decreasing the temperature on the leaf surface. One thing you should always avoid is having water droplets on the leaves, especially if your orchids are in full sun. And this is because the droplets of water act as a magnifying glass. So the beam of light will actually be focused on this particular spot here, and it will create a small burn on this leaf. Also, if you've just treated your orchids with any type of oil, whether it's neem oil or horticultural oil, you should definitely keep it more shaded. Oil can actually act as water on the leaves, but the bad thing is oil does not evaporate. It will always stay on the leaf. So if you recently used any oils with your orchid or a leaf shine, keep it out of the way of the sun. Another thing to remember is that spring sun can actually be very dangerous for orchids, simply because in the wintertime they did not receive too much sun perhaps, they didn't receive high quantities of light and they're not adjusted to the sun just yet. Imagine you're going to the beach for the first time this season, you go in the sunshine and you get absolutely red. This is because your skin is not adjusted to the sun just yet. The more you tan, the better the skin can actually handle the sunlight. It's the same with orchids. They produce a substance that actually adjusts their leaves to the quantity of light they receive in springtime. So when you're trying to adjust an orchid to sun, do this gradually. Give the orchid 1 hour of morning sun only at the beginning and then increase the amount of time the orchid spends in sunlight. But again, do this gradually. Now, some orchids can display a sort of a reddish hue to their leaves, especially the ones that require bright light. This is a sort of a tan. It doesn't mean that you're burning your orchid, it just means your orchid is adapting to the sunlight. But beware, this is a sign that this amount of light is sufficient for the orchid. Don't try to increase the amount of light or the period of time the orchid receives direct sunlight. So use this as a cue that your orchid is receiving enough sunlight, but do not go any higher than this. Similar to the red tinge on the leaves are the freckles. I have a Vanda orchid here which displays kind of purple, dark purple freckles. This is again a sign that this orchid is receiving enough light, but if I would give any more light to this orchid, most probably I will have a sunburn. So the next step after the red tinge or the freckles is a sunburn. So pay attention to your orchid, and if you ever see these symptoms, just know that you should not give any more light than you already do. Okay, so this was the video regarding sunburns and how to avoid them. Hope it was useful. If you have any more questions or suggestions for me, just leave me a comment and I'll get back to you. But also make sure in your G+ settings that people outside your circles can reply to you. Otherwise, I cannot reply. So if you've enjoyed this video and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe. And thank you for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye!